Let's turn to our assessment report on fall assessment data. Trustees, as you know, we fulfilled our commitment to complete fall assessment data within the first 9 weeks of this school year. We did administer some NWEA and other required assessments in math and reading. They were administered very differently than ever before because our students and families were supporting our students in taking those assessments remotely. So as Trustee Lazarus mentioned, we will be very interested in the spring data to see how our students have fared across this school year. Of course, we know the most important assessment every day is a watchful eye and the guidance of our top quality professional educators in every classroom. Our teachers use this assessment data really to inform the teaching and learning in the classroom. That's the most important use of this data, but we do want to share it out with our board and with our community. So Ms. Linden, I think you're here to join us and share, as you did in performance committee, the fall assessment data. Ms. Linden.
Thank you, Dr. Swift. I really appreciate being here, trustees, President Johnson, to share this data with you. We will go ahead and share screen and go through a few of the slides, if that's okay with you. There are a few important points in this particular launch that we'll begin with. So let's go ahead and hop in. I'll spend a little bit of time on this particular slide. There's an awful lot of information here, and I think we need to wade through it a little bit to make sense of the data we'll see after this particular slide. As Dr. Swift mentioned, this is a requirement, Public Act 149, followed by Public Act 0165, legislated that this year all public schools needed to assess all students in grades kindergarten through 8 within the first 9 weeks of school. So to gather that fall benchmark data. We also have to, again, by legislation, assess before the end of the year. The data is posted as required by legislation on our transparency website, and that had to be posted by February 1st. And so that getting those requirements out of the way, let's think about what we're about to see together. So during the fall, we did assess our AAPS students in kinder through 8th grade. It is really important to remember that this is the first time we've assessed our students in a remote setting. It's the first time we've done a lot of things, of course. But in this remote setting, there are certain factors that are in our control and certain factors that are out of our control. And so we know that the experiences that our students had during the assessment, preparing for the assessment, varied greatly from student to student. In this third bullet here, this is a really important piece. When we looked at the assessment choices and options we had to fulfill the legislative requirement, we quickly realized that our limitations in delivering NWEA to all students, kindergarten through 8th grade, was going to be limited. For our youngest students, they did not, in this particular remote setting, using technology, they didn't have the ability to get teacher direct support or assistance at all during the NWEA assessment, meaning that a student could be online and could be taking an NWEA assessment, but they could not also be participating in a Zoom meeting to get help with a teacher. So that influenced our decision to not deliver NWEA to our K1 math students and our K2 reading students. We felt like the issues that students would face in attempting to take a rather lengthy, up to a 45-minute assessment in NWEA without direct support from a teacher, and putting parents in a position where they may have to troubleshoot technology issues that may come up during that assessment and many other things, was a bridge too far. And so for K1 math and K2 reading, we utilized the legislative option to do a local benchmark assessment. So you will see those data for K1 math and K2 reading are different. They are not NWEA data as we're used to sharing with you. For our students in 2 through 8 math and 3 through 8 reading, we did the NWEA assessment remotely. The last bullet here is also important. So we understood that in this remote setting, we were likely to see lower assessment completion rates. Every year when we assess, there is a population that chooses to opt out. When students are coming in every day, we can provide better opportunity for that assessment, certainly, but that was one factor. That the opting out for many families, given the stress of remote learning, being in the midst of a pandemic, families did choose in larger numbers not to participate in the assessment. We also know that access to adult support during that time was a challenge for students, continues to be a challenge for some students. And also there are technical issues that are faced anytime an assessment is delivered. So those are some factors I think that are important for us to think about before we take a look at the next few slides. So let's go ahead and hop in. We're first going to begin with our kindergarten data. At the top chart, this is our math benchmark data for our K1 students. And the bottom of this chart is the reading data. So we've combined both of those here. So we'll start at the top. In grade K, we have a mean score out of 20 possible points on this assessment of 14.39. The way those scores fleshed out, we had about 6.8% of our kindergarten students considered below expected level on that assessment, about 48.5% of students at expected level, and we had 44.7% of students above expected level. And the count for kinders was 1,102 students took that assessment. Now, this is a math assessment of 20 questions. It was developed in collaboration with educators using questions directly from our everyday math assessments and using expectations that everyday math is carefully put together through norming and much research to show what is expected for kindergarten students during the kinder year. At first grade, similarly, collaboratively developed assessment, 20 questions. The mean score there was 12.86. And we saw data that showed 15.7% of students were below expectation, 50.7% of students at expectation, and 33.6% of students above. And there were 1,201 students who completed that assessment. The math assessment was delivered in live Zoom with the teachers, and as much as possible was delivered one-to-one, sometimes in small groups of 2 or 3. And student responses were recorded. On the reading, we chose to deliver our reading benchmark assessment through the Lexia Core 5 assessment. Now, trustees, you may recall that Lexia is a reading support tool that we've had in the district for a few years now. Just a year or so ago, we expanded the use of Lexia from only being used in our Title I schools to being used in all of our elementary schools. So that's a tool that our students are familiar with using almost daily. We felt it was something that they could log into, could use with relative ease. And that placement test that students take at the beginning of the year takes about 20 minutes. And so students in K1 and 2 completed that reading assessment. These mean scores are different. There are skill levels here. The skill level targets I can share with you in just a moment. But in mean scores, you can see those. We'll shift right to the right of this chart and you can see where they fell out in terms of being below, at, or above. So 23.3% of kindergartners were below expectation, 74.4% were at expectation, and 2.3% of kinders on this reading assessment were above expectation. In grade 1, 28% below, 62% at, 10% above, and in grade 2, 34% below, 64.2% at, and 1.8% above. And so these targets on the mean score side fall in line with Lexia norm data. So the target for entering kinder students is about a 2. And the target for grade 1 is to enter at level 6. The target for grade 2 is at level 10. So our second graders came in slightly below that expectation. And now we'll take a look at the ethnicity breakdown. We're going to first look at mathematics. This is a newer chart that we've added to the report. So we'll take a look at this breakdown at the request of our trustees, and certainly it is a process we always do when we look at our assessment data. So you can see here in bold across the top, that's the data we just saw from our previous chart. It's what all students, all 1,102 kindergartners look like and their breakdown. And then you can see our Black students, our economically disadvantaged students, our English language learners, our special education students broken down here. And so you can see certainly there are differences in the percent of students that came in below grade level. They do mirror our data that we've seen, unfortunately, year after year. And we'll take a look at the same breakdown for NWEA. And the same is true over at first grade. We can take a look at that breakdown. Again, at the top, you'll see the comparison to all students, all 1,201 students. And then you can see at that breakdown how our students perform by ethnicity in terms of coming in with readiness for the grade level. So this always points to the work we have to do. It is no more important than it is this year to have these data points, particularly with these kinds of assessments, because they tell us exactly where our skill level lies and what we need to do to support it. In the next chart, we'll take a look at our benchmarks for reading. So grade K, again, at the top, you'll see what the district level data for all 1,295 students who completed for kindergarten. Beneath that is the breakdown by ethnicity. Again, you'll see the same kinds of differences, higher numbers of students performing below grade level in our targeted areas, which is part of our equity plan and our work at the district level that continues with great focus. Same for grade 1, which is below our chart here. For grade 2, you'll see that grade 1 students show a similar pattern. And grade 1 being another important year in reading development for students, it's a place where we target quite a lot of our intervention at the district level. So this is where our building literacy experts do much of their work, is at first grade. And then at the top right, you'll see our second grade numbers. We'll move into NWEA. So these are our results for mathematics and reading, grades 2 through 8 math and readings 3 through 8. Here you're going to see just general data for the district. So we provided for you here the breakdown of the last 5 years. These data points we can compare. It isn't the first time we've given these assessments, so we do have historical data, and these make us see a lot more patterns when we have that availability, as more so than we do an assessment we've given for the first time, like those benchmarks that we just left the slides for. So on this slide, there's a lot to take in. We start on the left-hand side. We are showing you your fall 16-17 data, and we compare the fall data to every year since, leading up to this most recent fall year. And so looking across the chart with grade 2, you can look at the mean RIT, but probably a more meaningful score will be the score in the middle of each of these years, where we see the percent of students who are at or above grade level. And so you can see back in 16-17, at grade 2, those students had an 80.6% rate of being at or above grade level. You can look at it from there in 2 ways. You can go across the chart and see how second graders do as second graders in the district year after year. You'll see some small fluctuation, but overall, no significant change. And so when you look all the way across grade 2 row, you'll see that in fall of 2021, we showed 83.7% of students at or above grade level, which falls fairly much in line with the data we've seen in the last 5 years. You can also start at grade 2, and you can look at the blue squares on a diagonal trend downward. And that data, if you look down at the blue squares only, you'll see the same cohort of students and how they do year after year. So there are some caveats to that that'll be important to share. One is that when students go from 2nd to 3rd grade on NWEA, there's a significant change in the test at that point. So 2nd graders enjoy a lot of intervention tools and resources at their disposal. They're considered early readers and early learners. And so much of their assessments can be read to them. When they get to 3rd grade, that intervention support is turned off. And so we often see, and you'll see in our data, a drop year after year from 2nd to 3rd. That's an anticipated and expected drop. So keep that in mind, that is typically something we can explain by the difficulty level of the test. So keep looking down that blue row, and you can see how the students perform over time, when they started as 2nd graders in 16, 17, and they ended all the way down as 6th graders. Now there's another significant change in the way we look at the data. So you'll notice that for grades 6, 7, and 8, we have no data available to share with you for the 5 years prior. Now what we do have is data from one school, because historically we have not given the NWEA at all 5 of our middle schools. This year in the fall marks the first time that all 5 of our middle schools gave the NWEA. So prior to this year, there was just one school's data, and it wasn't meaningful to compare that to all students. So we didn't show that to you today, but we'd be happy to share that one school's data for the past 5 years and separate that out so we could see some of that. So that's why you see the grayed out pieces for grades 6, 7, and 8. And again, I just want to remind you that when you look at the N counts for 2021 and you compare those Ns to the previous years, you are going to see a drop there in the completion, which of course we anticipated. The story on this slide really is we don't see any significant change or drop when we compare this year's fall data during COVID, during remote instruction, with all the challenges we all know exist. There is no significant change in that data when we compare our fall data to previous years. So that is something we took away. Now we're going to take a look at the same data, and we'll see it by ethnicity. And you'll see some of the same patterns we just talked about with benchmark data. And so we'll start first with our math data. You'll see that same chart, but now you're going to see different categories of ethnicity and student groupings. So here we can see, again, you're going to follow that 2nd grade group on a cohort level by looking at the blue charts on a diagonal, if you want to see that cohort, or you can look straight across and see how a grade level over time, same grade, performs year to year. So there's a lot of data here. There are very few pieces I would pull out right now, other than to say that typically when we see drops across the board. In certain places. And there weren't any significant places where we brought out one area from the fall 2021 to point to. We do see the same discouraging data when it comes to the breakdowns of the student groups that we know we need to serve much better than we ever have in the past. And so it continues to be our work. And I welcome much more discussion and conversation about that work as we go along. And next chart is the same data, but looking at it through a reading score. So again, you'll see similar changes, but no significance statistically to speak to at this moment when we set aside fall 2021 as a special and unique year here. Now, I will share that we do intend to give the NWEA again in the spring, as we always do. We will give the NWEA at that time knowing and hoping that we will be face-to-face with our elementary students. We do hope to be able to give the NWEA to our K-1-2 students. We will have that data to share, and we can compare that data to previous spring years and show some comparisons just like these for those students as well.
Ms. Linden, for those parents who may choose to remain virtual, they would take it the same way they did in the fall.
Correct.
So doesn't mean they will miss out if we are all back in by the spring window.
That is correct. You bet.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the last slide. I know I've been a little long-winded here, and there's just a lot to unpack. So happy to take questions, but some of the recapping we've spoken to, we do know that the NWEA was administered differently. This was given remotely to students. They were semi on their own during this time, whereas typically they would be in a classroom. If they hit a glitch, a teacher would be right there to support them. Here they had to go to the help Zoom. So some of that does present some challenges. We also have talked about the fact that, and Dr. Swift beautifully shared this in the introduction, that these data are used regularly and often by teachers to help design the lessons, to understand interventions and supports, to understand the strengths that students are bringing so that we can meet their needs. All of the information gained from these assessments that we gave in that first 9 weeks was used to inform the instruction in that first trimester. This information was reported directly to parents as required by legislation. So each parent received that score data for their children in addition to more detailed report cards. I should share that we all understand that these assessments were snapshots in time. They were one day and one moment of the child's education and life, and whatever is happening on that one day always impacts how a student performs. These data, as we've said, on the NWEA side are revealing no significant evidence of learning loss when we compare to fall. We are carefully monitoring these data as well as the anecdotal and regular formative assessments that teachers give on a daily basis. And it goes without saying, but I always need to recognize the hard work of our teachers and staff. They are working extremely hard this year to fill gaps, to support students, and they continue to do that. Our goal is to make sure our students make as much academic progress as possible this year. So I want to thank them and thank you all for this opportunity, and we can take whatever questions you may have.
This is really a benchmark for the fall. So where we will really see the work of this year is in the spring. So we had thorough discussion of this, as Trustee Lazarus pointed out, with the performance committee, but we are anxious to see the end of the year data because that will really tell us how we did this year with growing our children from where they were in the fall. So with that, President Johnson and trustees, we will make sure that this is posted, and Ms. Linden will help us with that once she's off of screen.
Thank you, Dr. Swift and Ms. Linden. I'd just like to say that I appreciate seeing this data. I do know that this is just one data point, as you've said over and over. I think as we look at, especially in the higher grade, the secondary grades, grades, their actual scores that they get on their report cards, et cetera, that'll be helpful too. But I do think that as we really, try out this virtual learning, and we've heard parents say that their kids were in virtual learning since March last year to really get some type of concrete, metric around what learning loss may have occurred. And as trustees, we're looking at that actual data to make decisions and to gauge, how much learning loss has happened, at least as one small data point in that. So this is really critical information, and I really appreciate you bringing that to us. And thanks to the performance committee for going through that as well.